So obviously, big news out of Israel and Gaza. This was the week where massive protests in Tel Aviv and around the country took off. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets after 6 hostages were found dead. Israel said they were shot at close range before they were found. They were found in a tunnel under Rafah city. Here are some of the images of that protest. Now, a lot of people are giving their thoughts on what the protests are really about, what they're not about. And I will conclude and I will concede that no, these protests are not angry that 40,000 plus civilians have been killed, that, currently the vaccination campaign against polio is happening under bombs that are being dropped, continue to be dropped, in fact, on vaccination sites. So, good times. No, it's not about that. But it is about the fact that in these 11 months, almost 11 months on the 7th now, we're nearly a year that Israel has managed to free 7 hostages. Very few hostages have been freed, right? And many and there are about 100 still left. And loved ones and the civil society broadly are fed up with the tactic that the Netanyahu government is employing, which is basically just brute force. We know that 4 hostages were rescued at a refugee camp in Khan Yunis, but 274 Palestinians were murdered in order to save those 4. Now, what happens when you do that, right? What happens when you are trying to use militarism and use brute force to free hostages that are being held by your so-called enemy, right? Or your enemy. And you do something like killing 274 Palestinians in order to free 4 hostages. What message does that send to Hamas? It's going to send a message of, oh, they're not interested in negotiating. They're simply interested in using brute force. Well, what do we have to play in our favor? We also can kill people. And so they did. And so the risk was, gee, they're circling in and they're zeroing in on these hostages. Do we allow them to kill 274 more people, or do we just kill these hostages? I'm not justifying it, but that is just that is like, I've seen the movie The Negotiator, y'all. Like, I've seen action movies. That's how it fucking works. Right? And so that's exactly what Time Magazine was reporting because of Hamas and what they said. Abu Abaida, who is a spokesperson for Hamas's Al-Qassam brigade, said that the new instructions came into place after Israel conducted a rescue operation in June that freed 4 hostages but resulted in the deaths of dozens of Palestinians. And that is that hostage takers, the hostage guards, now have actual orders to kill the hostages. These are people who were alive days ago. They were alive for 11 months. They were alive. Now, so shit has changed now. And he said this, quote, the Netanyahu's insistence to free prisoners through military pressure instead of sealing a deal means they will be returned to their families in shrouds. Their families must choose whether they want them dead or alive. Well, the families have chosen. Family members are leading these protests against the Netanyahu government. They are enraged that there has been no serious negotiation, no movement, that there's a constant moving of the goalposts. And they want their loved ones back. One of the Israelis who was killed was an Israeli American whose parents spoke at the DNC. And he was alive. But because Israel fails to negotiate for these people's freedom and for their loved ones, and they truly are using them as pawns, because so long as there are hostages, they can keep bombing Gaza into the Stone Age. So a forum of hostage families demanded a complete halt of the country to push for the implementation of a ceasefire and hostage release. That is what they are demanding. And yes, in fact, yesterday, although it was Labor Day in the United States, Israel's largest trade union, Histrodotl, I'm pronouncing that terribly, I'm sure, they called for a general strike, and it was successful. They closed malls and the Ben Gurion airport, government ministries. Biden apparently says now I'm gonna make him a final offer. There's gonna be a final offer to both sides. Listen, man, let's sit down. Let's have some vanilla. Listen, man, rocky road. Our road is rocky. So Biden's going to offer Hamas and Israel some sort of ceasefire plan. Hey, buddy, why don't you restrict weapon sales to Israel? Because that'll get them to the table. They're the ones who've been holding out on this. And again, this is what we've been saying for months. It is because of Netanyahu's political future is tied to making sure that this genocide continues. That's it. So there is no incentive for him to negotiate honestly with Hamas. There's every incentive to keep on, again, by force, raiding tunnels where they know the hostages are and by some miracle are alive. So the whole thing is not just, it's not a tragedy. The whole thing is an abdication of responsibility on the part of the Israeli government, on the part of the American government. I mean, I think Egypt and Qatar are attempting these negotiations. But look, there is, you can't, what is there left to lose in Gaza? Do you know what I'm saying? Like the acts of October 7th were barbaric but desperate. They were acts of desperation from the beginning, and every resistance movement, every liberation movement is always about acts of both violence and desperation that are not justified but put in the context of occupation and war and erasure and extermination are absolutely understood. So I am glad that Israelis are taking the streets. I hope they continue to do so. We need them. And Americans are also taking the streets. School is back in session. Universities are starting up. And with that, there are protests, largely, specifically around this issue, because people are still witnessing every single day the crimes of this government, of the Israeli government and the United States government by extension. And to that end, it is not a crazy thought to block weapon sales to Israel. Look at Reuters. Look at this Reuters headline. UK suspends 30 of its 350 arms export licenses to Israel. Okay, there's still like 300 licenses, but it's a start. Benjamin Netanyahu freaked out about this news. The UK was suspending 50 licenses. Freaked out about it. How dare they? When 6 hostages were found. 6 hostages you absolutely didn't give a shit about. You couldn't care less. How do we know that? Because you would have negotiated for their release by now. How do we know that? Because it had already been done in November of last year. But I guess, that was just too much diplomacy, too fast, too furious. We need to kill, how many more? We needed to kill 35,000 more Palestinians to get to this point. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders, for his part, is attempting to block that $20 billion arms sale that the Biden administration is proposing to send to Israel that includes F-16 fighter jets. For what? I'm sorry, for what? They have a greater chance of crashing or coming under friendly fire than suffering anything. Hamas? Hamas's leverage has been the hostages. This is not a war. So anyway, we'll continue to cover it. It's just wild to me, but I am so, again, grateful that that Israelis are taking the street. And I know it might not be because of, the same reasons that we take the streets, but pressure is pressure and it matters. And these families should have had their loved ones home, and the families of the 40,000 murdered should never have had to lose them. Okay? I mean, we've been seeing a lot of headlines. The final thing I'll say is, please don't try to dabble in this. Some lives are greater than others. I know you see the photos of these 6 hostages. I know they're white. I know they've got brown hair. I know maybe some of them have blue eyes. Please please try to see Palestinians as just as human as these 6 hostages. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.